Name of subject, internal combustion engines. Name of chapter, SI engines fuel supply system, ignition system, combustion. Name of the topic, auxiliary circuits. Contents, auxiliary circuits. Dear friends, in the last few videos, we already started to discuss about the carburetor and the different concept of the carburetor. We understood that the carburetor is a device which is used to supply the required amount of air and fuel mixture to the engine cylinder. That air and fuel may be a rich mixture, it may be a lean mixture, or the stoichiometric or chemically correct mixture. As per the need of the engine, the carburetor can supply the required amount of air and fuel mixture. We also understood the working and constructional details of the simple carburetor. Okay, but with the help of that particular things, we come to know that carburetor can supply the amount of air and fuel mixture, but sometimes it is not limited, or we can say the carburetor is not able to supply the exact amount of air and fuel mixture according to the need of the engine. So that time there is a need to use some additional devices, and that additional devices are nothing but called as the auxiliary circuits or compensating devices. Auxiliary circuits are nothing but called as the compensating devices. Okay, I'm just repeating my statement. As we discussed, the carburetor can supply the required amount of air and fuel mixture to the engine cylinder, but many of times what happen, carburetor is not only able to supply the required amount of air and fuel mixture to the engine cylinder. Okay, there is a need to use some additional associated devices which is generally used to supply the exact amount of air and fuel mixture to fulfill the need of the engine, and that things are nothing but called as the auxiliary circuits or compensating devices. Okay, again with the help of this notes part, we can understand what do you mean by the compensating or auxiliary circuit. So any automobile on road has to run on different load and speed conditions. Here the road conditions play a vital role, especially when we talk about the city roads. Due to the traffic condition, carburetor be able to operate the vehicle at low speeds, means between 25% to 60% of the throttle opening. So in the traffic condition, if you consider the city road, again the carburetor will not fully open that particular throttle. Only we have to operate the carburetor by opening of throttle 25% to 60% because of the traffic condition. During such conditions, the carburetor must be able to supply nearly constant air fuel mixture, which is economical, and that is nothing but 16:1. So in this case, this 16:1 is economical mixture, and in such kind of a condition, the carburetor should have to supply the required amount of mixture to the engine cylinder. However, so this is again very important statement. However, the tendency of simple carburetor is to progressively reachen the mixture as the throttle starts opening. So this is the tendency of a simple carburetor. Okay, even though it can supply the amount of mixture to the engine cylinder, but there is no any kind of a control is possible over the carburetor. So it has a tendency of a simple carburetor to supply a progressively richer mixture. So many of times carburetor is can supply the richer mixture rather than required amount. So this kind of a tendency which has a carburetor. So the mixture as the throttle starts opening. So initially as the throttle starts opening, then carburetor, because of its tendency, it will supply the richer mixture. In this case, the main metering system or other devices will not sufficient to take care of the needs of the engine. So as I told you earlier, in such kind of a condition, the other devices or other metering elements which associated with the carburetor is not sufficient, or it is not able to supply the sufficient amount of mixture to the engine cylinder, or we can say the devices will not be sufficient to take care of the needs of the engine. So there is a need of certain compensating devices which are usually added in the carburetor along with the main metering system. Okay, so there is a need of use some auxiliary circuits or carburetor to fulfill the requirement, to satisfy the requirement of the engine cylinder, so as to supply a mixture with a sufficient or required air fuel ratio is possible. So this is about the compensating devices or the auxiliary circuits. And with the help of this, we just understood why or what is the need of compensating devices or auxiliary circuits in the simple kind of a carburetor or even in the carburetor. Okay, so again, there are different types of compensating devices or auxiliary circuits are there. One by one, we'll understand in detail. So it starts with the emulsion tube. It is also called as a air bleed jet. The second one, idling jet. The third one, the compensating jet. The fourth one, auxiliary air wall. Fifth one is auxiliary air port. And sixth one is back suction control mechanism. So along with these six auxiliary circuits, two more auxiliary circuits or compensating devices are present in modern carburetor, and that is nothing but called as the first one is power enrichment or economizer system, and second one the acceleration system. So now one by one we are going to understand in detail along with the diagram of each and every auxiliary circuits. So we already discussed about the simple carburetor diagram. We discussed about the constructional details. So this is again a simple kind of a carburetor, but it has some specialty. And that specialty is nothing but called as the emulsion tube or air bleed jet. So this carburetor is having some additional devices along with the element of simple carburetor, and that devices or that device is nothing but called as a auxiliary circuit or the compensating device. So where is that? So again, here we have the main tube of the carburetor. We can say the body of the carburetor. Again, here is the venturi. Here is that particular jet through which the amount of fuel will come inside the throat section of the venturi. This is the float chamber where the amount of petrol can store. Again, here is that particular throttle valve through which the amount of air and fuel mixture to supply to the engine cylinder. Okay, so let us consider this is the main jet through which the amount of petrol will come out and it will spread in this particular throat section. As we already discussed about the working principle, as the pressure difference happens between the throat section of the venturi and the float chamber, and because of the carburetor depression, the amount of fuel will come from high pressure to low pressure side. Okay, so here the additional things are connected to this main jet. Okay, and this additional thing is nothing but called as the air restricted air bleed connection, we can say. Okay, so sometime what happen, as we discussed, the carburetor has a tendency to supply the rich and mixture at the start of the engine as the throttle will open, and that time the engine required some required amount of air fuel mixture the carburetor is not able to supply, and because of that the pressure will increases or decreases at the throat section. Okay, so to use of such kind of additional systems, we can able to supply the required amount of air and fuel mixture to the engine cylinder to satisfy the need of the engine. So in this case, what happened? The additional connection which provided along with the main jet. So this is the main metering jet tube through which the amount of diesel is injected. So this is open to the atmosphere. This side is again open to the atmosphere, means we can say this tube is directly in contact with the atmospheric air. So as the carburetor starts working, the amount of fuel will come from this side and it will come up through the jet at the throat section. At the same time, some additional amount of air will come from this side. Okay, what I am telling, please understand my statement. In this case, what happened? The required or some additional amount of air will come inside this particular carburetor jet, or we can say this is about the main jet, that additional amount of air inserted over here, and because of this additional air there is some changes in the pressure which creates inside this particular main jet of the carburetor. Okay, and because of that there will be a changes in the flow of fuel which will come up through this particular nozzle of the jet. So with the help of such kind of a restricted air bleed, we can maintain the pressure inside this main jet. Okay, and because of such kind of additional system, this particular carburetor can able to supply the required amount of air and fuel mixture to the engine cylinder. Okay, so this is something about the emulsion tube or air bleed jet. This arrangement is nothing but called as the air bleed jet arrangement or the emulsion tube, which is directly connected to the main metering jet of the carburetor, where the amount of fuel will come up through this particular nozzle of the carburetor. Okay, this is about emulsion tube or air bleed jet. Now the next one, that is nothing but called as a idling jet. So what do you mean by the idling jet? We already discussed about the idling, process of idling in the case of the carburetor. So similarly here we have the another arrangement. Here is that particular idling adjustment screw, and this is the idling. So as I told you earlier, if the traffic condition is there and that time the throttle is fully closed, the accelerator is fully closed and accelerator cable is not going to operate, that's why the throttle is fully closed, and that time there is a need to supply the air fuel mixture to the engine cylinder. So this side is totally closed because the throttle wall is closed one. So that time we have to utilize this idling system. So the connections are there as we already discussed. So in this case what happen, the atmospheric air will come inside this particular section of the tube, and then that air will come over here, and it creates the pressure differences in this section, and because of the pressure difference, another tube which is connected to the float chamber, the amount of petrol will come up from this direction, and then air and fuel will be mixing together inside this section. Then it will supply through this particular tube of idling. Okay, and then the carburetor is able to supply the required amount of air and fuel mixture to the engine cylinder through these idling connections itself. And again here is that particular idling screw. We can adjust the supply of air and fuel mixture during the idling as we already discussed. So this is the simple working principle of idling jet. This is also one kind of auxiliary circuits which is present in the carburetor. Again, as the throttle opens, the pressure difference, whatever air amount of air coming inside that particular tube, it will be stopped, and then again the regular flow of air from this side will start to take place, and from the throttle opening the air fuel mixture is directly sending inside the engine cylinder. That time there is no any kind of a fuel or air will come from this side. Okay, so this is about the idling jet. So the next one, when we talk about the compensating jet. Compensating jet is again a very important one kind of auxiliary circuit. So if you see again, along with the simple carburetor, some additional jets are present over here. Suppose this is the regular jet which is situated at the throat section, through which the amount of petrol will come up, and its spray will supplied inside the engine cylinder through the throat of the venturi of the carburetor. So the additional connection which is attached over here. Okay, the float chamber is connected along with some additional connection, additional fuel tube, through which the additional amount of petrol will supplied. Okay, and because of that there is one kind of connection which is provided in this case, and this one is open to the atmosphere, means this section is totally in contact with the atmospheric air, and this is called the compensation well. So in this case, what happened? Sometime as the requirement of the engine is increases and carburetor want to supply the rich mixture to the engine cylinder. That time it is not able to supply the required rich mixture. Okay, so that time this additional compensating devices will come into the work. That time what happen? The extra amount of air and fuel mixture, or we can say the extra amount of fuel, will supply to the engine cylinder from this direction or from this another tube. So in this case there will be a two jet, we can say there will be a two nozzles. So through the two nozzles the more amount of fuel will come up inside the throat section and more rich mixture supplied to the engine cylinder, or we can say the required amount of rich mixture supplied to the engine cylinder. So the additional system which is present along with this regular simple carburetor system. Okay, so because of this this side is open to the atmosphere, it is the main reason behind that is what? To maintain the flow of fluid, to maintain the pressure of the fuel as per the requirement. If it is not contacted with the atmospheric pressure, then it is very much difficult to supply the amount of fuel from low pressure to high pressure. Okay, or high pressure to low pressure. So that's why this compensation well is always there. So other things are very much same. So this is about the working principle of compensating jet. So in all kind of auxiliary circuits, you should remember these additional systems are works together to fulfill the requirement of the engine. Sometime it required a lean mixture, or sometime it required the rich mixture. But only simple carburetor is not able to supply the exact amount of mixture. No doubt it can supply the air fuel mixture to the engine cylinder, but I'm telling the exact required amount is not possible to use of simple carburetor. So we always use some additional systems along with the carburetor, and that is nothing but called as the auxiliary circuits or compensating devices, as we discussed earlier. So the next one, this is called the auxiliary air valve. So what is the need of auxiliary air valve? So again the same construction details are present over here. Again in this case the main jet is present over here, through which the amount of petrol will come up and it will spray in the section of the throat section. Now in this case there is one additional arrangement is there, and there is one auxiliary wall along with the wall spring which is present. Okay, now in this case what happened? There is one tube which is connected to this auxiliary air wall, and this end is open to the atmosphere, we can say. Means this end is open to the atmosphere, through which the required amount of air will come inside the carburetor body. So sometime what happen, the pressure differences here, suppose as we already discussed in the working of simple carburetor, because of carburetor depression, as the pressure inside the throat section is less, and because of the less pressure and the pressure inside the float chamber, suppose here is the float chamber. So please imagine here is the float chamber, because we already discussed all these things thoroughly, and the amount of petrol will flow from high pressure to low pressure in this case. Okay, but sometime what happen, the pressure inside this section is very much low. Okay, please concentrate on my statement. Sometime what happen, because of the different road condition, different working conditions, the pressure inside this throat section is very much low, and more amount of fuel will come up because of very low pressure, and the more amount of fuel start to supply from the jet of the carburetor, and then again the more rich mixture will supply to the engine cylinder. Okay, so to avoid such kind of things, we have to use some auxiliary air valve. So in that cases, auxiliary air valve works, and what happens as such situation comes, the auxiliary air valve operates, the air pressure will act on this particular valve spring, and the amount of air will come inside this particular section, and it goes in the throat section of the venturi. As the more air comes, so it can control the amount of air, or we can say the pressure of the air inside the throat section. So because of these things, we can maintain the pressure as per the requirement, and usually the required amount of low pressure can maintain at the throat section, and because of that we can able to reduce the supply of fuel from the float chamber to the main fuel metering jet. Okay, so additional air we can supply, which is used to maintain the pressure of the air as per the requirement. So this is called the auxiliary air valve. Okay, similarly the next one, the auxiliary air port. The working principle is very much same. In this case, here we have to use additional auxiliary air valve devices, but in this another type of auxiliary circuits here, this port is an integral part of the carburetor. Okay, so the working is very much same as the what we can say, the pressure. We have to maintain the pressure inside the throat section. Then in this case the additional air has to supply from this side. This butterfly type valve will operate, and that air will come in this section of the carburetor, and it is able to control the flow of fuel as per the controlling the amount of pressure of air inside the throat section. So through this we can supply the additional air inside the engine cylinder, and because of this additional air can supply the pressure of air at the throat section of the carburetor venturi. So this is called the auxiliary air port. So the next one, that is the another auxiliary circuit, this is called a back suction control mechanism. So this is again very important. So here is some different kind of arrangement which is present over here. The function is again very much same, to control the pressure inside the throat section. Sometimes the pressure goes very down, and because of that more amount of fuel will come up from the fuel jet nozzle of the carburetor. To avoid this, here we have to use some additional things, and the arrangement is just like this one. So here is one control valve. So in this case the amount of air will come inside this particular section of or the tube, and the additional flow of air we can control with the help of this control valve. Here is the control valve, and that air can send through this, and the extra amount of fuel, or we can say the required amount of fuel, we can send through this one. So this back suction control mechanism acts both way, means sometimes the pressure is very reduces, and because of pressure the more amount of air will supply to through this particular jet, and that time it works, and it can able to maintain the pressure inside the fuel chamber, and because of that we can reduce the supply of fuel. Sometime as per the requirement of the engine, sometime the more mixture has to be supplied. That time again this back suction control mechanism will work, and it will supply the required amount of fuel supply to the engine cylinder. So in this case, initially what happened, as the air enters through the control valve, then that particular amount of air comes inside the float chamber, and because of that air pressure, the pressure inside the float can be controlled, and because of that pressure sometime the more amount of fuel will come up through this orifice, and then it will supply to the throat section. Okay, so this is the one work of this particular back suction control mechanism. Sometime what happen, as there is a need to reduce the supply, that time again control valve can operate and more amount of air can enter, so we can control the pressure. So this is a kind of work which is totally depend upon the creation of pressure inside the float chamber as well as inside the throat section. So this back control mechanism can control the pressure of air as well as the pressure of fuel inside the carburetor. So this is all about for the back suction control mechanism. Similarly, when we talk about the another system which are used in a modern type of carburetor, and this is called a power enrichment system or economizer. This is also called as economizer. So again, this is very simple in construction. The mechanical linkages which are provided over here. Again, the venturi is there. This is that main fuel metering jet through which the amount of fuel will insert inside the throat section. Here is the float chamber. So normally, as the amount of fuel or petrol will send inside this particular tube, and then it will come out. So in this case, sometime the additional air fuel mixture or additional or the required amount of air fuel mixture has to be sent. So in this case, one additional mechanical linkages are there. So this is one kind of a plunger, and this is one mechanical lever which is attached over here, and here is that particular choke valve. So in this case, what happens, as the air enters from in this case, suppose the air is enters in this direction, and as the air pressure acts on this wall, this lever will get lift up. Okay, so this lever particular move in upward direction, and as the lever move in this case, so with the help of this highlighter we can understand, as the air will come from this side, or this is the direction of air, as the air pressure acts on this particular lever, or we can say there is one wall, and this mechanical lever which is attached to this, and this will move in this direction. Okay, this will move in this direction, and because of the motion of this lever, this plunger will get lift up in upward direction. Suppose this is will be get lift up in upward direction, and where the plunger wall is present, as the plunger will get lift up, more amount of fuel will supplied through this particular tube, or this through this particular fuel jet metering tube itself. So the more amount of fuel we can supply, and the required rich mixture can able to supply through the injector. So this is about the working of power enrichment system, that is called economizer. Similarly, when we talk about the next one, that is called acceleration system. Again, the working is very much same, only the arrangement is different. Now this is the mechanical linkages, mechanical lever is there, and another mechanical lever plunger operated things are present over here. Spring is there. So in this case, as the air pressure acts on this particular lever, then it will move in downward direction, and it presses the plunger down. Okay, so this is connected to the float chamber. So again, here is the amount of petrol which is already present. So with the help of this acceleration system, what happen, as the spring pressure acts inside this particular section where the already the amount of petrol is there, so we can just accelerate the flow of petrol inside the tube of the fuel metering jet, and the fuel with the accelerated fuel we can send inside the throat section. So this is called acceleration system. As it will move downward direction, this plunger operate because the mechanical linkages are there, and as the plunger operates, its pressure acts, the spring pressure acts on the petrol which is already present over here, because this is totally connected to the float chamber. Then the fuel with extra pressurized fuel will supply to the throat section of the venturi of the carburetor. So this is about called as the acceleration system. So hope you understood the different things about the different acceleration circuits, or we can say auxiliary circuits, as well as the compensating devices of the carburetor. So thank you so much for watching today's session. Thanks a lot.